In terms of drugs, the valley of death is that difficult stage where there's a great idea with some preliminary data, but it's a year or 2 years away from going into a human or a trial and really proving that it is worth the large-scale investment that's needed from pharmaceutical companies or tech companies to actually make it an accessible drug. And in that valley of death, lots of wonderful ideas wither on the vine and die because they can't get the investment or the backing to make it through. And more than once, philanthropy in this community has helped bridge that valley of death for different projects.
Welcome to Learning from Leaders, a podcast from Southwestern Medical Foundation where we dive into a world of wisdom, mentorship, and innovation, exploring the insights and life lessons of seasoned community and business leaders. I'm Michael McMahon, President and CEO of Southwestern Medical Foundation. I invite you to subscribe now and join us on this empowering journey of growth and leadership. Now, let's learn from the best and drive meaningful change together.
Welcome to the Learning from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Mason Smith, and our guests today are two renowned physician scientists from UT Southwestern, Dr. Benjamin Greenberg and Dr. David Greenberg. Both are trailblazers in their respective fields. Ben in neurology and translational research, and Dave in infectious diseases and antimicrobial research. And yes, they are brothers. Dave, Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
I don't know why he said there were two renowned, but we'll work on updating your information.
Well, we'll find out today.
Okay.
So, we wanted to start by just learning a bit about what you're doing now. So can you give our listeners a high-level overview of your roles at UT Southwestern?
Sure. So I'm a professor of infectious diseases and microbiology. I'm a physician scientist. So part of the year I am in the hospital seeing patients. I do transplant infectious diseases, really our most vulnerable patient populations at UT. They get a whole variety of infections from our solid organ transplant patients, heart, lung, liver, kidney, to bone marrow transplant patients. And on the research side, I focus on, at a high level, antibiotic resistance from both a therapeutic as well as a diagnostic point of view. And in between all that, I do a lot of education at the medical school.
Awesome. Ben?
I sort David's mail and whatever else he tells me to do. When I'm not doing that, I'm a professor of neurology. I focus in autoimmune disorders of the brain and spinal cord. So the most common that people will have heard of is multiple sclerosis, but we also have a center focusing on some rare disorders, something called transverse myelitis and autoimmune encephalitis. I see both adults and children. So I work at UT in the outpatient setting and the inpatient setting and at Children's. And then on the research side, I have a focus on clinical trials. How do we get discoveries that are happening in the lab actually into people to be studied?
Awesome. Well, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about maybe a research project that you're really excited about right now, or one that's been recent, so we can get even more detail on the kind of research you do.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow, you never let me go first. This is wonderful. I did my infectious diseases training at NIH, an amazing place that is sort of the pinnacle of what we would call bed-to-bench science. How can we take discoveries from patients, understand them in the lab in a way to then go back to those patients for new treatments or new diagnostics? So my entire research program tends to focus on problems that I've observed in the clinical world and then think about ways that we could solve those problems. So we do that in a variety of ways. One example in the lab is actually a medical device that ultimately spun out into a company out of UT, and we can talk about that more, but it's basically a device that is used to treat certain types of infections that happen on human implants, an artificial knee or an artificial hip. And when those get infected, they get these coating of organisms on the metallic or plastic object. We call that a biofilm. And those biofilms are really difficult to treat and get rid of. Antibiotics can't get to where they need to go. Your immune system, your white blood cells can't get to where they need to go through this thick matrix that we call a biofilm. So we invented a device that actually uses magnetic fields to basically heat up implant and kill off the biofilm. And that was discovered with myself and my co-inventor, Rajiv Chopra, who was at UT Southwestern for many years in the Department of Radiology. And we came together to try to tackle this very challenging infectious diseases problem. And that led to this discovery and ultimately spun out of the lab and is now a company. But a lot of the microbiology around how do you deliver magnetic fields, do they interact with antibiotics to kill off some of these infections, a lot of that work still happens in my lab today.
And on my side, on the clinical trials, there are several going on that have really been exciting, and I've really enjoyed moving things out of the bench and into patients. We have the first and only trial of a stem cell transplant therapy into individuals who've been paralyzed by this condition called transverse myelitis, where we're directly injecting these stem cells into the spinal cord to try and regenerate tissue. And this was a first in human phase 1 trial and is going very well. We look forward to sharing results with everybody. And we've also worked on ways to prevent damage. So we have one trial going on for our multiple sclerosis patients where instead of taking a therapy every day or every month for the rest of your life, you get one treatment once to remodel the immune system and then hopefully never need a therapy again. And so far, the results have been very exciting. So lots of different ways to try and translate the discoveries that are happening to the labs into meaningful therapies for individuals.
Amazing. And for less scientifically oriented listeners, could you explain what a stem cell therapy is and why it could be such an important breakthrough technology in the future?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because there are lots of different places advertising stem cells. I think I can go into a clinic in Capel and get a stem cell therapy or a 7-Eleven at this point. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what different people mean by stem cells. I'll give 2 examples because we actually have 2 stem cell trials going on that are very different. A lot of times when people use the term stem cell, they imagine a cell that can go in and repair tissue. And that's the type of trial we're doing in our myelitis patients. And there are lots of places to generate these cells, different sources of these cells. But then there are also stem cells that relate to the immune system. The classic is your bone marrow, and you deal with this in our bone marrow transplant patients on the infectious diseases side, where some people refer to that as a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, because essentially your bone marrow are stem cells, but they're not going to repair tissue in your brain. So one of the trials we're doing is a stem cell transplant trial to remake the immune system. It's not going to repair tissue, but it could get rid of an autoimmune disease. And in another trial, we're using stem cells that have been programmed to repair tissue. Those are much harder to find and much harder to come by. A lot of what we hear advertised are stem cells that are meant to change the immune system, but not necessarily repair things.
Right. Thanks for that. So we've covered a bit about your research side of things, but y'all are physician scientists. You also work in the clinic and you also teach. And that seems like quite a big workload. I'm sure you lose a lot of sleep, but would love to get an understanding of how do you balance that? What does a typical day look like, typical week look like, juggling all those roles? Maybe we can start with Dave.
Yeah, these 3 gray hairs are just from this last week alone.
We're going to need a Photoshop to get it down to 3. I hate to tell you.
The 3 additional ones, you should talk. All right. So, my life just depends on any particular week. If there's a week that I'm on the transplant infectious diseases service, then I am basically at the hospital all day and I don't see the lab very much, nor am I doing a lot of education. There are a couple points during my year where I'm running a course for the medical school, and so much of my time will be devoted to running the course. And then when either of those things aren't happening, then I'm basically in the lab. And the research group is pretty large now because we span multiple different domains. I described one. We also have an arm of the lab that's focused on antibiotic development, and everyone knows about antibiotics, but they're losing their effectiveness. And so we're trying to come up with new ways to really create new ones. And then the whole side of the lab that's focused on diagnostics and new technologies to more quickly recognize whether you have a drug-resistant infection. So my lab's sort of broken into thirds, and depending on the day and depending on the week, that's where I'll spend a bulk of my time.
Yeah, at the core of your question is really kind of a broader life question in terms of when you're wearing all these hats and how do you move through this. The favorite new term in my vocabulary over the last decade has been this notion of work-life balance. I get asked about this by trainees quite a bit, this notion of balance. And my response is often, in my opinion, there really isn't balance in the sense of everything being in harmony all the time. I look at this as a juggling act, and I can represent different aspects of my life with different balls. So there's my work as a clinical trialist, my work as a clinician, my work as a parent, my work as a husband, a lot of work as a brother, because some brothers need more help than others. And in any given day or any given week, we're juggling all these things in life. And what I remind my trainees is every day there's a ball on the ground. There are days where I'm not the best researcher because my attention is being paid elsewhere. I can only attend to one thing at a time. Sometimes I'm not the best parent or the best husband. I'm always a great brother. And the advice I give people who are looking into academic medicine and wearing lots of different hats is rotate which ball is on the ground. It can't be your spouse or your work or yourself on the ground every week, week after week. And so, as David articulated, given the day of the week, different balls will be in the air in different ways. But that's part of the fun of academic medicine. There are no 2 days that are the same. And one of the things that's been particularly rewarding at UT Southwestern is the people we surround ourselves with. There is no way for either of us to do what we do without incredible teams around us. And that's people in the lab, people in the clinic, people in the administration, people balancing the budgets, helping with the grants, staff making sure that we work in a clean, healthy environment. I mean, it's a huge group of thousands of people. And while we're sitting here enjoying a podcast and hopefully connecting with the community, there are large groups of wonderful people making this possible. So it's a lot of fun. It's not easy, but it's a lot of fun.
Learning from Leaders, along with Southwestern Medical Foundation, is powered by generosity. Your support can help fuel breakthroughs in medical research, provide critical patient care, and support medical education. Additionally, it helps support the Learning from Leaders podcast and content like this. Every gift matters. Consider making a contribution today at swmedical.org/give. That's swmedical.org/give.
Maybe taking a little bit of a step back to childhood. I'm curious.
He broke my GI Joe. Let's just get it out. Let's get it out.
We have to dive into it.
He stole it and then broke it.
So I'm curious because it's pretty remarkable that as brothers, you're both at the same institution, obviously different scientific fields, but eerily similar roles. Did one of y'all inspire each other? Could you kind of go back? What's the life like in the Greenberg family growing up?
So first,
before his first time at rehab or after the first time at rehab? There's different time points.
To be clear, it's your fault, technically speaking, that I'm here.
It is.
At UT Southwestern. So you've only yourself to blame that I ended up at this institution.
It was a great opportunity. It was a good move.
Yeah. So he actually, well, I'll go back to childhood in a minute, but I am really here because of Ben. Ben got here about a year before I did, year and a half, something like that.
About a year, yeah.
And he's the one who sent me the job description for the faculty position that I have now. And so, you didn't have to do that. But he's like, hey, they're looking for a physician scientist. So I arrived here about year and a half after you did. Although, Ben was the one who was dropped as a child, I think everyone would agree that his recovery has been actually pretty remarkable on most days. We grew up in a household. My father, now retired, was a physician, actually an infectious diseases physician. My mom was a teacher. We both, at least for myself, didn't know at age 5 that I was going to be a physician, let alone that I'd be a physician scientist. So I know people who are like, I knew since I was 5 years old, this is what I was going to do in life. I was not like that at all. It took me a while to commit to medical school and took me a while to get hooked on research. But I do remember growing up that my dad, when he would come home from work and he was in academics, always had these interesting stories to tell, always had seen unusual things. He never pushed medicine on us as saying, this is something you should do, but just in the home atmosphere, it kind of permeated sort of day-to-day life. And I actually went to a performing arts high school. So we both, as a other side of us, grew up in the arts from a very early age, and many members of the family who are artistic. And so I would be in shows in the summer and then ended up at a performing arts high school. And then during high school in my summers would actually work in a lab. So I started getting exposed to research and kind of dabbling in it during high school, and then continuing in college, doing some research, and then ultimately decided on medical school, and the research piece just stuck, and I really enjoyed it. But I don't know, would you have the same thoughts? It for me, it was an evolution that getting into medicine.
No, I think you're right. I'd fill in maybe, from at least my perspective, a couple interesting details. So as we were growing up, I agree. We were never pushed towards medicine or anything along those lines. I was going to go into law for the longest time. I loved debating and arguing.
Oh, did he ever?
Yes, and
Still does.
Still does. My recollection, and you can correct me, is I actually made the life decision to pursue medicine maybe right before you did. We were both in college. I was about to enter college. David was in college. And when entering college, I made the decision to be pre-med. I think you were still deciding if you're going to commit that route. And it was interesting because I have an older brother, and I felt like I had decided before him. And then he goes to medical school. We wind up we were in the same university, so different high schools. We both went up at Johns Hopkins for undergraduate. We were actually physics lab partners. And despite what he tells you, I carried him through the class. And then we ended up going to the same medical school. We both went to Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. David stayed on to do his residency. And it was very interesting watching my older brother kind of mature through the medical field. And I remember distinctly, I must have been a third-year medical student, and David was an intern, so towards the end of his internship year, and I took call with him one night. So I spent the night following you around, and it pains me to say this because it's being recorded, but I walked away really impressed. He's an outstanding physician. He was wonderful with patients and very thoughtful, and I walked away going, son of a bitch, God, he's good at this. That really pisses me off because it really pushed me. And then the full end of that story is we have a younger brother who's 6 years behind me, who at some point, this is probably before HIPAA was a thing, got permission to do an overnight. He was in college, trying to decide what he wanted to do with life, spent a night with David in the hospital, came home and signed up for the LSAT to go to law school. So he had a very different experience than I did doing call with you. But it was interesting. There wasn't pressure on us in childhood, but we both wound up in very similar spaces. I was the black sheep of the family. David and my father being infectious disease physicians. I announced I was going into neurology, and the teasing was constant and prolonged.
And continues.
And continues, yes.
It's funny, I actually had a similar experience to your younger brother, Charlie. My sister went to medical school at UT Southwestern, and I saw her go through it. And going into college, I was like, you know what? I think maybe a different path is good for me. But I highly admire the path both of y'all took. I guess now maybe even looking to what you're trying to do into the future. We've touched on it a bit, and Dave, you talked about it directly with Selenic and the company that you helped start. But both of y'all are, in addition to all these fantastic roles at UT Southwestern, you have started companies, obviously teams of people working on that. But I'd love to hear some of the origin stories of how these companies started and how they're going now and whatnot.
Now that piece, if you asked our parents today, would they have ever thought that either of us would have tried to start a company or get something out of the lab or anything of any sort of even entrepreneurial, nature, they're actually just dumbfounded. They want to do genetic testing on us. They don't know if we're their children because those are things that we were never exposed to nor taught from the time I was a child to going through college to even medical school. Actually, those all these things of, how do you get something out of the lab or out of the hospital actually is not something that's really taught in any meaningful way in medical school then or actually today. So the fact that this even happened to both of us is still, I don't even, it's hard to believe actually, because there was no formal training for me along the way. For me, I would say what made this possible was sort of my original comment that, the way I have tried to connect the research I do with clinical care is thinking about the end and then sort of working your way backwards to thinking about paths to solving a problem. And, that does make the physician part, I think, of a physician scientist helpful because we have this clinical exposure, we have clinical experiences, we have a sense of, what's really problematic today, in a patient population or in a hospital setting or an outpatient setting or a particular disease. What are these unsolved problems and how can I bring research to bear or what I'm working on in the lab to go down a path that could actually help that particular patient? You don't always know where discovery is going to come from. And, this is not to say that there are tremendous discoveries made every single day, sort of doing science for science sake. And seminal discoveries are happening on this campus by, not thinking about it that way, but just really dissecting some new mechanism of disease that is leads to a transformative discovery. So those are supremely valuable. But I think the idea of trying to think at the end about a problem in a patient only helps set you up for when you find something you've already teed up the ball for something that could viably get out of the lab and get into patient trials. And that's what happened with Selenic. My lab is basically a biofilm lab, and we study these biofilms because we're trying to make new antibiotics. Actually, this Selenic was an offshoot of my main project, as many things happen in science. I was a biofilm lab. We're trying to make new antibiotics. These biofilms form in the human body. Traditional antibiotics don't work against biofilm infections. We were trying to make antibiotics that do. So we became a biofilm lab. And then one day my co-inventor, who is a physicist, said, "What are biofilms? I don't understand this. Please explain this to me," over lunch one day. And through talking about the problems, they said, maybe this is a way that we could approach it. And so thinking about the clinical problem was critical, actually, to driving the program as rapidly as we did to get it out of the lab. And then it became clear along the way. First, I had to teach myself about the whole world of things like intellectual property. How do you know when to protect an invention? Other things that we really weren't formally taught along the way, and it's a very important piece of this puzzle. How do you protect an invention, and then how do you get it out of the lab? So I've learned a lot over the years, and now for the new things that I want to get out of the lab, the roadmap is even a little more clear than it was at the beginning.
And yeah, Ben, would love to hear from your side. Your company is called GenRab, and would love to hear the origin story and more about that.
Yeah, it's very similar. I think what you'll hear is part of this is a confluence of events superimposed on a certain way of viewing the world and viewing translational medicine. I mean, we were, obviously we went to same institution for undergraduate and for medical school, different residencies and fellowships, but in very similar institutions to UT Southwestern that really look to merge the science and the clinical medicine as much as possible, whether it was at Hopkins or the NIH, very similar philosophies. And what happens is for clinician scientists, which are a very small group of individuals within medicine. If you look, for example, at UT Southwestern, which is obviously a world-class institution on the science side and the clinical side, the number of individuals, even at Southwestern, that are identified faculty as clinician scientists is probably in the 10 to 15% range, if I had to ballpark it. We have outstanding clinicians who do some research, but it's not focused, outstanding scientists who may not see patients. And those wearing multiple hats in this way, in that lens of looking at a problem or looking at a project and trying to find the applicability, in the old days would lead to discoveries that would be handed off to pharma companies or biotech companies, and it would be very unusual for the clinician scientist or the scientist to take a lead and actually an entrepreneurial lead in developing a company. But that's becoming more of a accepted and very useful way to turn discoveries into therapies. And Southwestern's been investing in this and been investing heavily in that tool for our faculty to really develop their discoveries. For GenRab, it started with running a biorepository. So I was creating a tool for scientists on campus. We have lots of scientists who want to study neurologic disease, but they don't have access to blood or spinal fluid samples from patients with those conditions. And there is no hypothesis to test to build a biorepository. So I can't apply to the NIH. They're not going to give me any funding today or 15 years ago to build a tool. When I was recruited at Southwestern, I was brought as a Cain Dennius Fellow, a Cain Dennius Scholar, and very generously that philanthropic gift helped fund the first several years of building the first neuroscience biorepository for the campus, where I evaluated patients, collected samples, and then made those samples freely available to researchers on campus who wanted to better understand patients. One of those users was Dr. Nancy Munson, who's a professor of neurology and immunology, and she wanted to study the immune system of MS patients. And I said, great, I'm seeing a lot of MS patients. And around the biorepository, a partnership was formed that ultimately led to the identification of potentially therapeutic antibodies. Antibodies, proteins made by patients that we identified as potentially being therapeutic. And so we are using that tool, that biorepository, where we partner with amazing patients who are willing to literally give of themselves a blood sample or a spinal fluid sample to promote research, and then finding in them, they often hold the key to new therapies. And so GenRab was born out of that endeavor.
That's fantastic. Well, it's great to hear the entrepreneurial journey that y'all have gone on and continue to do so. And I'm curious, it's a big challenge to start a company and to get new technologies into patients' and physicians' hands. And there's this term called the Valley of Death that a lot of new technologies have to go through in terms of both on the research, but also the commercialization side. And what have been some of the strategies you've employed to move through that valley and really try to scale what you're working on?
See, in our household growing up, the Valley of Death was our rooms when we didn't clean them up, and our mother would refer to it as the Valley of Death. I've realized now it had a different connotation for this, but it's in terms of drugs, the Valley of Death is that difficult stage where there's a great idea with some preliminary data, but it's a year or 2 years away from going into a human or a trial and really proving that it is worth the large-scale investment that's needed from pharmaceutical companies or tech companies to actually make it an accessible drug. And in that Valley of Death, lots of wonderful ideas wither on the vine and die because they can't get the investment or the backing to make it through. And there are lots of strategies that I've been forced to discover to make it through. And I know you've been very successful, Dave, at navigating this. But for us, there are lots of different sources of support. So traditionally at an academic medical center, applying for grants, whether it's a NIH grant, which as we all know in the news today are decreasing in size and number, foundational grants, patient advocacy organizations, international groups that have an interest around a certain area can be extremely helpful at getting you that next piece of preliminary data that would unlock a bigger investment. And I have to say, one of the things that's just been extraordinary in Dallas, which is extremely different than so many places in the country, is not just the level of philanthropy, but the level of targeted philanthropy and partnership between the community and Southwestern. When I was doing my training at Hopkins, which is a world-class institution, which is very good philanthropically at raising funds, it had nowhere near the investment from the community and at the large scale and the diverse scale that Southwestern has done. And more than once, philanthropy in this community has helped bridge that valley of death for different projects. So we try a variety of different sources, and we've seen, and we have, you may not be able to tell, episodically a little competition between us. One of the things we've seen is from our Office of Technology Development at Southwestern, a bigger push to identify opportunities for non-dilutive funding support to help with different projects, and there are innovation days that they host where different companies can compete to win prizes. GenRab did win the year before, David's company, but he wasn't competing that year, so he'll claim he just didn't take us on. But things like that have been incredibly helpful in piecing together the funding that's necessary to get that next piece of data. I don't know if you found other sources.
No, I mean, I think I'll just echo what you said. It's well, it's not just a team science sport. I think actually both the things we're doing, we couldn't have done individually. It really took a team scientifically to get it out of the lab. But the other pieces, how do you maintain that? So actually, Selenic is a good example that in the early days, we had funding from, loose change under the couch all the way to large grants from the NIH that actually allowed for the foundational work to become a company and unlock early investments from friends and family to unlock the next discovery that in our case led to Johnson & Johnson being one of our Series A lead investors, major company. The other thing I'll say about that is so critically important about discoveries out of academic centers is goes back to some of the mission of the academic center, which is not just doing the science, but publishing your work. It was actually one of our published papers that someone emailed us coldly, an engineer from Johnson & Johnson, who called us, said this was a cool paper that started this conversation that ultimately led to an investment. So the way that we disseminate our scientific knowledge is actually critically important for getting through this valley of death because it unlocks a whole variety of things. And the other thing I'll say is I've been here now 15 years, you a little bit longer, but I would totally agree that at UT Southwestern, the environment for cultivating, identifying things in the lab and trying to get them out, and most importantly, not just that first step, which is really important, but then the next step of trying to fill in the valley of death. How can we help fund this and mature it until it's at a point that larger investors would be interested in? That capability has only grown since I've been here. The office has become quite savvy. Events like this feed into, I think, that ecosystem of what we're trying to do. Southwestern Medical Foundation has funded some of my early work through some of their programs. And so actually all these streams of funding, even though they're not necessarily huge in dollar amount, are all these pieces of the puzzle that allow you to do some of this early work to eventually get someone to say, okay, this is worthy of a large investment. So just like, I guess, investing in retirement, diversification is good. And so the classic thinking of, NIH is the only way to fund things, I actually disagree with. For us, it took multiple streams of support, both philanthropic, governmental, institutional, all combined to make it happen.
Amazing. Thanks for touching on the impact that the foundation has had. That I think means a lot. And I have a kind of multi-layered question. You see a lot of policy changes going on at the federal level, and y'all both touched on the importance of NIH funding, although not the only source of funding that's important. How do you think UT Southwestern can navigate this as an institution, and maybe also Texas more broadly as a state? And the other layer to my question, which I wanted to ask Ben, is there are some positive state initiatives that are going on. There's a new initiative that's hopeful to get voter approval called DPRIT to fund mainly neuroscience research. So how do these different layers going on between the federal and the state level, and where do you see UT Southwestern coming out as a leader in how to navigate that?
I'll say two things, and then we can talk about the brain a little bit more, I suppose. So the first is, another interesting something that I've noticed since moving back to Texas is when I arrived here, we were and still are, at a premier research university, world famous, world class. If you look at where biotech is in the US, Dallas was not, 10, 15 years ago, a hotbed of biotech. Lots of companies were opening in Boston, lots of companies were opening in the Bay Area. Yet we were in a city that had tremendous resources, financial resources, tremendous philanthropic support. And I don't think 10 years ago, many of those dollars were being funneled into what we're seeing today. And that's been a huge transformation for Dallas. UT Southwestern, the Medical Foundation, is trying to cultivate things like Pegasus Park, the impending innovation hub that we could talk about. All of those are a recognition that we have world-class science here. Now can we drive some resources more directly to support this mission and get more life-saving things out of the lab? I only mention that because going back to diversification, it has never, ever been more important, in my opinion, with what's going on at the national level, to have diversified ways to support these projects. Because if NIH funding is getting cut by 10%, functionally speaking, that's 10% less grants that are going out to our institution and every institution. And so it's even more important than ever that we cultivate every opportunity to try to fund innovation. And so it's going to take not just continuing federal dollars, but state and local resources, and then the philanthropy apparatus that exists in that state or city to help support these. And so the Innovation Center, the Innovation Hub, and what's happening at Pegasus Park can't come fast enough, I would say, especially when you look at what's happening at the national level.
Yeah, I would add to what David's saying that I actually think we're at a really critical point in time for medicine, biotechnology, discovery in Dallas and North Texas as a whole. So the cuts that are happening at the NIH will have long-standing implications for science and medicine in the United States. And speaking personally, just as myself, anyone who says differently is not correct. These are resource-intensive events. David's being pulled in 6 different directions on every day. If there's not somebody in the lab, a person who's being paid and being paid an appropriate wage to do cutting-edge work, the work doesn't get done. These are team groups, and the bigger the team and the more talented the team, the better the science and the faster the discovery. So that is a resource-intensive need. And one of the risks we have as federal funding gets cut is a loss of talent. People will go where there are resources. And if an institution, a organization is not resourced, we will not be able to retain or attract the people and the talent we want. So this is where it really becomes this multi-layered approach that David talks about. So if there is federal cuts coming, I encourage everyone to reach out and ask for that not to occur. And then for the state, the city, and our community to fill in the gaps where we can. And overall, I actually say this is happening. I think the institution's done a very good job of weathering this, but it needs help, and it reaches out to the foundation and the community. And the foundation and the community respond, and we're grateful and ask for people to recognize that those investments go a long way in the short and the long term. A person who might be considering leaving today, if they're retained and make it through this period of time, might be the one who helps us with big discovery 5 years from now. And so that attracting and retention of talent is critical. And that's where the city and the state come in. The more attractive it is to live in Dallas, the better it is for me when I try to recruit somebody from New York or Boston or San Francisco to leave and raise their family here and not just do science, but live their life here. So we rely on Dallas to do a lot to make this attractive. And then the state. And you referenced DPRIT, which is a fund initiative that will go to the voters in the fall. And the idea is to model what happened with CPRIT, the Cancer Research Institute, a large fund created to support neuroscience research, translational research that can affect brain-based disorders, dementia disorders, Alzheimer's, and other conditions, and support initiatives coming out of Texas, coming out of institutions like Southwestern, to address those issues. When David heard about this, he instantly started thinking of the ways infectious diseases cause Alzheimer's, but he's got some work to do on that. And it really is an incredible, I cannot overstate how incredible that fund will be for helping us bridge this issue of lowering NIH funds, but attracting the best and the brightest here to Texas to take part in it. Those types of initiatives go a long way for helping us achieve our goals. But the funding is critical, and any way we come together to do it allows us to get the right people here.
Amazing. Dave, you talked about the Innovation Hub, and I'd like to highlight that a little bit more. I'm sure that the UT Southwestern as an institution will tap you all to help with that as entrepreneurial commercialization leaders from the physician scientist point of view. Where do you see that evolving? And maybe you could provide some more details on how that's going to take shape.
Well, I think it's fabulous that they're creating it. So many opportunities that could come from that. And, it's a work in progress. It's just started. It's going to go through this growth phase of trying to figure out how best it can serve innovation on campus. I'll make a couple interesting observations because there are sort of two pieces to this. One is there's the whole, I made a discovery, how do I get it out of the lab and into patients? That whole piece, there's plenty more that can be done there from venture funds to help support getting you through the valley of death. The Innovation Hub could play a huge role there. How do we more rapidly get things out of the lab? What areas do we need to grow to bring the other resources to scientists or physician scientists to figure out, is it protectable intellectual property? Who might be someone that would be interested in this technology? So a lot to already doing a great job, a lot more where that can grow. The other thing that I find interesting that the Innovation Hub, I think, could play a role in is the number of times that I've sat in on a science talk and I'm listening to a story in the lab and someone's presenting really interesting science on a topic. And I look and I say, if instead of making that vanilla ice cream, you made that chocolate ice cream, you would have the cure to cancer. Meaning the identification, people can be doing absolute and are doing cutting edge science. That does not mean they have necessarily thought or identified if they tweaked this or tweaked that, it suddenly could escape the lab and be a drug or be a diagnostic. Or you're studying it over here in neurology, but we actually could use that over here in infectious diseases. And so in this whole ecosystem of amazing science that's going on today, I think the Innovation Hub, if it's populated with physicians and scientists and physician scientists as part of it, to help identify new discoveries that people may not have even realized could be translated out of the lab, I think that's a huge growth opportunity for the institution, and that could be constructed a lot of different ways. But probably the number of untapped discoveries that need to be extracted out of our labs is probably a really large number, and they could play a role in helping identify some of those things at an earlier time point.
And it gets to a word I would apply to that the Innovation Hub plays a role in is updating our culture. We were trained in classic medical schools and universities where we're scientists and we're clinicians. And in fact, I'd say when we were training, there may have even been a looking down upon those who went an entrepreneurial route. And it's really changing the culture to recognize there needs to be a partnership if we're ever actually going to help individuals through our discoveries. And one of the things that makes a university unique and very different than a health system, or very different than a college, which is just the academic and not the translational work, is this cross-pollination of ideas and the idea that a community of individuals can lead to certain recognitions and discoveries that individuals never would. So I may get the story wrong. I think it's the Princeton math department that years ago, back then when there were chalkboards, I'm dating myself, wouldn't allow professors to have chalkboards in their office. They had to be in the hallway. Everybody could see what you were working on. And the idea was, as your colleagues walked by, they'd stop and say, have you ever considered X, Y, or Z? We at a university host things called grand rounds, where the Department of Medicine or Neurology will host a speaker and have an opportunity for an hour of the week to take a step away from your science, your patients, and listen to what's happening somewhere else. And there are more productive 5-minute conversations that happen after grand rounds where we can all get together culturally and in an ecosystem that happen any other time of the week. Those interactions are only created through a university that has a certain culture. And I think the Innovation Hub helps us now advance our culture even further to add a layer of conversation around how do we take a thought or a discovery or an idea and actually turn it into an application for a human. We like to say, at least in our department, I'm sure it's true for medicine, we want to give outstanding care to the patients we see today, but we really want to be better tomorrow and next year. And that's the point of discovery. We're supposed to be better at this next year than we are today.
Amazing. I think that's a really good segue into the next topic, because you all both have talked about the importance of this being a team sport and the collaboration and the cross-pollination of ideas. I think also specifically you all both run labs, and I'd love to understand how you view, both in the lab but in the clinic, how you mentor your trainees, the younger either medical students or physicians, and how you think about mentorship.
So I'm pretty sure you'll hear from David that mentorship happens at community beer, and because no matter how many times I go there, he's already there. So I'm pretty sure there's some sort of drinking involved. But in seriousness, mentorship really requires time and attention, which is our biggest commodity. Where are we going to spend our time and attend to? And it takes investing in whether it's students or graduate students or technicians or research coordinators, spending the time to understand what their goals are, what their career goals are, their professional goals are, their educational goals, and trying to craft experiences that are beneficial for that. And trying to give as good advice as we can around personal and career development, but really looking for people to understand the bigger picture. Often we can all get lost in the minutia, and I like to remind some of my staff who work on the biorepository, who in a year might consent 200 individuals and collect 500 blood samples, and it can be very monotonous and very tedious. that literally what they did over this year was create a resource that will someday cure a disease, and hope that everybody understands the part that they play as part of that team. There is nothing that's unimportant. It is all critical, so that people really recognize they're part of this bigger mission at the university. But it takes time and engagement.
Mentorship is so critical, and I've been, amazingly lucky. I am here doing what I'm doing today because of truly remarkable mentors that I had all
You're
the
welcome.
way along. He misunderstood what I was trying to say.
I just assumed.
He was misunderstanding. Other mentors that actually had a major impact on me. And what's really important for students, residents, trainee, young faculty, people who are just getting started, certainly having an understanding of what they want to do is important. The mentor's job is to help get them there based on what their goals are. And I have numerous medical students who rotate through my lab, many of whom have never done research ever in their entire life. And they come and spend a summer with me, short period of time, 8 weeks. How much can you do in 8 weeks? Not much. But they don't know that. And for someone just starting out, there are many shiny objects and many unanswered questions to work on. And the mentor's role is to help understand that it's not so much the shiny object, and it's not so, there will forever be interesting questions that need to be solved. It's what's an interesting question that you could solve in 8 weeks? What's an interesting question that you could solve in 8 weeks that could allow you to present at a meeting and cultivate your career path and develop the products and knowledge base you need to get to the next step? So it's a multi-dimensional process the mentor fills, and it's a really important one.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing those experiences as a mentor and a mentee yourself. I think now we're going to jump to the rapid fire question round, and I think this should be fun. So yeah, especially with the brother dynamic. So here we go. I guess first one, we'll start with Dave. Who gets the final word in a debate, scientific or otherwise?
Me.
Would you agree?
Well, clearly no. Now it's me, and I think we just proved.
Love it. Who was the better student growing up? Ben?
That's a good question.
What was your GPA?
Definitely higher than yours. So I'll go with me. Let me put it this way. I actually showed up for the physics final on time. So if that's the definition of a better student, then I won that day.
One could say when you're so prepared, you only need half the time to take
Fair enough.
the exam.
All right, he's the better
All right,
student.
it's a tie.
A tie.
Who's more fashionable?
David. I'm going to cede that one.
Who's more likely to show up late?
Well, what happened today?
Yes, but that was an aberration. I think you're going to grant me this one. I think punctuality goes my favor.
Really?
Yes, we'll ask Mother later.
Okay. To be continued.
Speaking of mother, who's the favorite sibling according to your mom?
Charlie.
Yeah, the third brother. Who's the better cook?
Ooh.
Okay.
We'll split.
Them's fighting words. How are we going to...
You'll take...
I guess give your specialty dish.
Well, very briefly, when I was an intern, I was part of a group called the Hardcore Supper Club. 3 interns, gourmet chefs. We would have 8-9-hour meals to blow off steam during residency. So I got into cooking probably earlier than you did, and I've enjoyed it ever since. However, Ben, in recent years, has taken on a new love of cooking from many dimensions, and I will say his brisket rivals many.
And so I appreciate that. Dave's winning on the bread baking side of things. He's killing me. So I think we split the meal in a variety of ways. And he was cooking an internship. I was studying and taking care of patients. So I had a late start.
All right. Well, I'm expecting an invite both for brisket and bread
Done.
soon.
There you go.
Who would win in a trivia contest? Not about biology.
So is this like Trivial Pursuit from the 1980s? Would it be like 2000?
Let's say Jeopardy.
Jeopardy.
This would be definitely depends on the category. If it involves what's being served at community beer, he wins.
What category would you win at?
All the others.
Really? Next question.
All right. Similar. Who's more competitive on family game night?
We don't like playing games with each other anymore.
All right. And last one. Who would survive longer on a deserted island?
Definitely me. Yeah, that goes without question.
Why?
You'd be done within a couple days. Like, it wouldn't be pretty.
How would I meet my demise exactly?
Are we on the same deserted island? Because that changes things.
Then it would be a fight to the death.
Yeah, okay. That would change everything.
It would change everything.
Well, this is so much fun, Ben and Dave. Thank you for your time. And, also, you gave a lot of great lessons to our audience on leadership, on science, and what you're doing, also on the commercialization front. And we're just excited to see what you guys continue to accomplish for UT Southwestern and beyond. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Learning for Leaders.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate
Of course.
Thanks for listening to Learning from Leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to subscribe now for monthly episode drops so that you can continue to learn from experienced business and community leaders to help you drive meaningful change in your community.